Expression radical 12 plus radical 13 lies between which two whole numbers? So as you can see, you can't see this just using your naked eye. You don't know exactly which whole number this is equal to, radical 12 plus radical 13, simply because you don't know what the value of radical 12 is and what the value of the radical 13 is without the use of a calculator. So I'm going to show you how to avoid calculator to solve this type of problem. So first, what you want to do, you want to relate each of these quantities inside the square root, right? So the square root of these quantities, you want to relate them to the nearest square root that gives you a whole number. So you know that radical 12 is less than radical 9. And why do I bring radical 9? Why do I bring this up? Because radical 9 is equal to 3. You know that the radical 9 gives you a whole number. Radical 12 is less than radical 13, which is less than radical 16. And radical 16 is what? Radical 16 is precisely 4. So now what you can do, you can basically add each number to itself. Well, except radical 12 and radical 13, we're going to keep it as it's given, but we're going to add the radical 9 to itself, and we're going to add radical 16 to itself. So what I mean is, notice that radical 9 plus radical 9 is definitely smaller than radical 12 plus radical 13. So I'm going to use this in yellow, just like here, given. So radical 9 plus radical 9 is definitely less than radical 12 plus radical 13, which is definitely less than radical 16 plus radical 16. Okay? So what does that do? This means that 3 plus 3, right, because these guys, each of them is 3, and this is 4 plus 4. So what this means is that 6 is less than radical 12 plus radical 13 is less than 8. So what this tells you is that this quantity, radical 12 plus radical 13, is definitely between 6 and 8. But the problem is that you don't know how this quantity relates to 7. Okay? You don't know if radical 12 plus radical 13 is greater than 7 or is it less than 7, right? We're going to have to play around a little bit more with this. So let's relate 7, because we also know that 6 is less than 7 is less than 8, right? So we have to play around with 7 and radical 12 plus radical 13. So let's do that. So as a result, we know that 7 will have to relate somehow to radical 12 plus radical 13. So now take a look at this. If you square both sides, if you square both of these, the relationship will still be unchanged. Okay? So let's say if 7 is less than radical 12 plus radical 13, squaring both sides would still make the left side less than the right side, even though both sides are squared. And if it's greater than, then that relationship would not have changed either, right? So we have to play around with this, square both sides, square both of these numbers, and then we're going to determine what the sign between them is. Is it less than, greater than, right? It cannot be equal to, but it can be less than or greater than. So let's square both. If we square both, and we write this as a question mark, that means we're going to have to square also radical 12 plus radical 13, because we're squaring both of them to compare the squares of them. Right? So as a result, what this equals to is 49. And let's make it a question mark. And now, what does this mean when you square them? When you square them, you will use the FOIL method pretty much, right? So I'm just going to write this twice so you can see what happens here. So we're squaring them means that you're multiplying these two together, and they're the same exact terms, and you're going to use the FOIL method to find the result on this side as a result, right? So we're going to have 49 question mark. So using the FOIL method, The first product is what? It's going to be radical 12 times itself, which is 12. And then radical 12 plus times radical 13, which is going to be two of these products, because the inner product, the outer and the inner, give you the same number, so it's twice that. So twice 12 times 13, right? So twice 12 times 13, and 12 times 13 is going to be what? It's going to be 156, okay, inside the square root, of course. And then the last product is what? Radical 13 times radical 13 is just 13, okay? So good, so we got that correct. So now what should we do? We should combine these two whole numbers together. So 12 plus 13 is going to be 25, right? So 25 plus 2, radical 156. Okay, so now what we can do, we can basically, we want to have as much the same material on both sides as possible in order to see what the difference is, in order to compare them properly, right? So what I want to do, I want to split this 49 as a sum, just like this sum is written. So I want to write 25 plus something to give us 49 on the left side. So what I want to do, I want to write 25 plus, now the rest to give us 49 would be what? 24. Right? 25 plus 24 gives you 49. And this is 25 plus 2 radical 56. So now what happens? Now what happens is, notice that these two guys are the same. So let's compare 24 and 2 times radical 56. Notice that 2 times means that we can express 24 as 2 times something as well. But 2 times 12, right? Question mark. And let me write this in red now. Maybe I should write this in red so that you can see we're trying to find what these are, right? So 2 times 12 is the same thing as 25 plus 2 times radical 156. So as you can see, these two are still the same, and they should be. Now these two are the same, the 2 times and then 2 times, right? Because 2 radical 56 means 2 times radical 56, right? This implies a product, these two. So now, as you can see, 25 is the same, 2 times is the same, and the only difference is 12 and radical 156. So we should compare essentially the 12 and radical 156. So if we write this down, 25 plus 2 times, so what we should do now is we should understand that this is a radical of a number. We should make this a radical of a number that gives us 12, right? So in order to compare the radicals, right? Because like we said, we want to make things as similar as possible, right? In order to see what the tiny difference is, in order to, find the answer to this problem. So radical 156, radical of something gives you 12. And that, of course, it should be what? It should be 12 times 12 inside the square root, right? To give us 12. 12 times 12 is 144. Okay? So maybe less space, 144. Okay. So 144, and here we're going to have 25 plus 2 radical 156. So now let's see. We're essentially comparing now 156 with 144, right? Because radicals of these two will also have the same relationship. So now look what happens. Since radical of 144 is less than radical 156, right? Because 144 is less than 156, square root of the 144 is also going to be less than square root of 156, right? Because just like the squaring we've done before, square rooting will not change the relationship, will not change the sign either. It will remain the same, right? Since these two, this is a true inequality, then we can go all the way back to where we started from here, 7 squared. So we can say then 7 squared is 49, so we can just write 49. Well, let's write it as 7 squared. So 7 squared, I'm going to write this using like that. 7 squared is going to be less than radical 12 plus radical 13 squared, right? And this is the reason why, right? Because we've shown that everything else being equal, these two compare in such a way, these two radicals, such that radical 56 is greater than radical 144. So overall, this side should be greater than that because everything else is being equal there, right? So then 7 squared is less than radical 12 plus radical 13 squared. Thus, taking the square root of both sides of this inequality gives you 7 less than 7 is less than radical 12 plus radical 13. Now, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? If 7 less than radical 12 plus radical 13, that means radical 12 plus radical 13 is above 7. But it's also what? It's also smaller than 8, according to here. Right? So as a result, this means what? This means 7 is less than radical 12 plus radical 13 is less than 8. Right? Thus, radical 12 plus radical 13 is between 7 and 8. So I hope this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for staying so long and watching this, and I'll see you in the next video.